1400 years ago, a man born here in Mecca in Saudi Arabia changed the course of world history. For 1.5 billion Muslims, he is the last and greatest of that long line of prophets who have brought the word of God to humanity. Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him.
Muhammad bin Abdullah, or son of Abdullah, was born in the year 570 in the city of Mecca, in what is today Saudi Arabia. The world into which Muhammad arrived was a brutal one, defined by hunger, violence, and tribal warfare. Muhammad had the good fortune to be born into Mecca's powerful tribe, the Quraysh. But his father died before he was born, and his mother died when he was only 6.
The young Muhammad was to learn even more about loss and sorrow. He was taken in by his paternal grandfather, who died just 2 years later, before coming under the protection of his uncle, Abu Talib, a powerful figure among the Meccan elite. Abu Talib was a trader taking caravans to Syria, part of a business which from ancient times connected Arabia to the popular centers and civilizations of the Middle East and beyond. Mecca was a link in that chain.
Soon, Muhammad began acting as an agent for wealthy merchants, taking their goods on caravans throughout Arabia. These journeys exposed him to a variety of other tribes and communities and a range of new ideas.
And by the time he was 25, he had become a successful trader, the leader of a caravan with a reputation as a shrewd businessman. Muhammad was also known as a man of integrity. He achieved financial success and built a happy marriage. However, he still struggled to find meaning in a world with so much poverty and injustice.
Bad treatment of the poor and the weak and the downtrodden people in society. There's definitely this great ontological anxiety he had about, the big questions. Why are we here? What's the purpose of life? How do we make sense of the world around us?
Muhammad would often retreat to the mountains outside Mecca to meditate. It was on one such retreat in the year 610 that Muhammad had an experience that would transform history.
Muhammad was meditating as usual, and he fell asleep. But then suddenly, he awoke. Muhammad heard one voice, and it commanded him with one word. Iqra, read. Muhammad replied, what shall I read?
اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم.
Muhammad now began to understand that he had a special responsibility. He had a message. Like the other prophets before him, he believed God had given him a vision. His duty was to share this message, to pass it on to the people around him, to help them change their lives for the better. Muhammad received a revelation from God, the first of many that would later become the Quran, the sacred text of Islam. He preached a new message that Allah was the one God, that he, Muhammad, was his messenger, and that all human beings would account for their behavior on the Day of Judgment. Initially, Muhammad took his message to those closest to him. The first convert was his wife Khadija, followed by family members like his teenage cousin Ali, who would eventually marry Muhammad's daughter. The key requirement is that conversion must be the exercise of free and informed personal choice.
لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي فمن يكفر بالطاغوت بالطاغوت ويؤمن بالله فقد استمسك بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله سميع عليم.
When Muhammad began his mission to the people of Mecca, he kept referring back to the Abrahamic message of the Christian and Jewish prophets, that he was only preaching what they had preached, the message of the one true God. And he repeatedly warns against oppression and the injustices of Meccan society. Muhammad's message was not always welcome. The rulers of Mecca, the Quraysh, disliked what he preached about equality for all. The more he preached, the more incensed the Quraysh became. Muhammad's followers, especially those with no clan or tribal protection, such as slaves, women and orphans, were now subjected to brute force. But it was at this moment that he had another extraordinary spiritual experience that would transform his life. According to Muslim tradition, one night, after falling asleep at the Kaaba in Mecca, Muhammad was transported on a metaphysical journey to a place hundreds of miles north, a city that is also holy to Christians and Jews, Jerusalem. And it's from this point that Muhammad begins one of the most powerful and extraordinary experiences of his life. He's taken on a journey where he meets all the past prophets, from Abraham to Moses and even Jesus, and he prays with all of the prophets.
سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى الذي باركنا حوله لنريه من آياتنا إنه هو السميع البصير.
The Prophet Muhammad leads Moses, Abraham, Noah, Jesus, Jacob, all the prophets. He leads them in prayer, and God speaks with Muhammad. And in this discourse, God orders upon the Prophet and upon all the Muslims the single most important action that a Muslim has to perform, the 5 daily prayers.
إن الصلاة كانت على المؤمنين كتابا موقوتا.
By 620, Muhammad's wife and the constant rock of his life, Hijira, died. Muhammad was devastated. She had been his beloved wife, his closest companion and advisor for 25 years. She had been the first to recognize him as the prophet of God, and had been the first person he had turned to when confronted by the terrifying and bewildering experience of revelation. Then, a few months later, Muhammad was hit by another devastating loss, the death of his uncle, Abu Talib, the man who had protected him from the worst attempts of the Quraysh to crush him. Attacks against Muhammad increased. His enemies now gave him a stark warning: stop spreading your message or your life could be in danger. Muhammad and his small band of followers were now at their most vulnerable. His enemies were now openly making plans to crush his embryonic Islamic movement and even to kill him. The next step he would take would be critical. It would shape not only his future, but the history of the world. Conditions had now got so bad in Mecca for Muhammad, he felt that he had no choice but to get his followers to do the unthinkable, to abandon the city of their birth for Yathrib.
The community in Yathrib was made up of a number of different tribes. Some of them were pagan, some of them were Jewish. And there was a lot of disagreement, in fact, in Yathrib between different communities, and they felt that they needed a mediator. And they had heard about Muhammad, and they perceived in him someone who could perhaps mediate in their disputes and be a sort of neutral arbiter and come and help them resolve the problems within Yathrib.
So Muhammad now had to get his followers out of the city without alerting the Quraysh. Over the next few months, a few of Muhammad's companions left the city each night, so as not to arouse any suspicions, until finally only a handful were left, including his young cousin Ali and Muhammad himself. Meanwhile, the Quraysh themselves had been planning, this time to assassinate Muhammad himself. The idea was that one member of each of Mecca's clans would stab Muhammad at the same time, making it impossible for Muhammad's own clan to revenge his death, as too many people would have been involved. One night, the group surrounded his house, and believing they saw someone sleeping in Muhammad's bedroom, the assassins, with their daggers drawn, rushed into his bedroom. But instead, they found his young cousin Ali asleep in his place. Muhammad had fled.
وَإِذْ يَمْكُرُ بِكَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لِيُثْبِتُوكَ أَوْ يَقْتُلُوكَ أَوْ يُخْرِجُوكَ وَيَمْكُرُونَ وَيَمْكُرُ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ.
This event became known as the Hijra, literally a cutting off from the past. There was now no way back for Muhammad and his new movement. The Hijra is so important in Muhammad's life and the history of Islam itself that the year in which it took place is the starting point for the traditional Islamic calendar. All Islamic religious festivals and events are still fixed using this calendar, dating back to the moment Muhammad left Mecca in 622 AD. Yathrib would later have its name changed in honor of Muhammad. It became known as Madinat al-Nabi, the city of the Prophet, or Medina for short. Muhammad's newfound freedom allowed him to build his own mosque. It became almost an extension of his own home. Muhammad used his mosque like a community center. Everyone was free to enter and speak with him. Jews, Christians, non-believers, even slaves.
In Medina, the Prophet continued to offer up revelations to his followers. But the nature of these messages was noticeably different. According to Muslims, the verses now reflected Muhammad's leadership status and added a new element to the message, a practical guide to creating and ruling a society. The revelations traditionally associated with Medina laid the foundation for Islamic law. They included rules on nearly all aspects of life, from prohibiting alcohol to allowing mothers to nurse for up to 2 full years. The verses provided guidelines for inheritance, gave new rights to the dispossessed like orphans and slaves, and set new rules elevating the status of women in society.
Muhammad's newfound power at the head of Medina's Jewish and pagan tribes threatened the Quraysh's status as Arabia's preeminent tribe. Several times they tried to crush Muhammad and his followers by force. The Meccans were defeated, and the threat to Medina was lifted. Muhammad had a secure power base in Medina. He could now turn his attention again to Mecca. In January 630, the Prophet gathered a massive army of 10,000 men and marched towards Mecca. The Quraysh were powerless to resist, and they fully expected Muhammad to storm into Mecca and exact a bloody revenge for the many years of persecution and war. Their control of the city was at an end. But after years of bloody but inconclusive conflict, Muhammad now wanted to defeat his enemies not through war but by peace. For Muhammad, this was the moment he had been waiting for. He had come back to Mecca not to kill the Quraysh, but to restore the Kaaba to its role as the sacred shrine to the one God. According to Muslim tradition, when he and thousands of his followers entered the Kaaba, they destroyed the many gods and effigies placed there. Although Mecca was now his, Muhammad chose not to move back to the city of his birth. Instead, he returned to his adopted home, Medina. And with the Quraysh defeated, it wasn't long before the rest of Arabia joined his cause.
By the year 632, Muhammad had achieved almost all that he had set out to achieve. In that year, he came to Mecca for the last time, and he performed his first and only Hajj, the pilgrimage. And he gave what became known as the farewell sermons. It was a deeply emotional speech in which, in his own words, Muhammad summarized what he felt he and his followers had achieved.
O people, lend me an attentive ear, for I know not whether after this year I shall ever be amongst you again. Therefore listen carefully to what I am saying, and take these words to those who could not be present here today. Do not therefore do injustice to yourselves. Remember, one day you will meet Allah and answer your deeds. So beware, do not astray from the path of righteousness after I am gone. All mankind is from Adam and Eve. An Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, nor a non-Arab has any superiority over an Arab. Also, a white has no superiority over black, nor a black has any superiority over white, except by piety and good action. All those who listen to me shall pass on my words to others, and those to others again, and may the last ones understand my words better than those who listen to me directly. Be my witness, O Allah, that I have conveyed your message to your people. After his farewell pilgrimage, Muhammad returned to his small house in Medina, exhausted. On the 8th of June, 632, Muhammad died. Muhammad left the world with three things: his faith in God, the example of his own life, and above all else, the Quran itself. Now, people will always choose and highlight those aspects of his life they want to support their own arguments whilst ignoring the rest. But if we examine his life in total, we find that he left Arabia a better place than he found it. When faced with persecution, he chose to suffer rather than to retaliate. Although he fought many military battles, he turned his back on war when he could. His ultimate victory came through peace, not through conflict. And with that victory, he chose the path of reconciliation rather than revenge. And finally, in his farewell sermon, Muhammad left us with the most important lesson of all, that we are all equal, Arab and non-Arab, Muslim and non-Muslim. A universal message that is as relevant today as it was in 7th century Arabia. And it seems to me that this is the true legacy of the life of Muhammad.